He threw the drink directly to her face while muttering something under his breath. It hit her square in the face. Ice cold, fizzing, humiliating. The glass tilted. The liquid splashed across her cheeks, soaked into her blouse, dripped from her chin onto the white tablecloth below. The entire restaurant went quiet. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died. A child at the corner table grabbed her mother's hand. And the woman, she was completely drenched, did not scream, did not cry, did not even flinch. She just turned her face slowly toward the man who had done it, and looked at him, with eyes so calm, so devastatingly composed, that several people watching said it was the most frightening thing they had ever witnessed. She said only 4 words. "You'll remember this moment." Then she picked up her handbag, stood from her chair with perfect posture, and walked out of that restaurant like she owned the building, because, as it would turn out, her family practically did. The events that followed in the coming days would cost that man everything he had spent his entire life building. His career, his reputation, his future. And by the time he finally understood what he had done, and who he had done it to, it was already far too late. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Stories like this one drop every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming. Juliet Hargrove was 28 years old, and if you passed her on the street, you would not look twice. She dressed simply, understated watches, no flashy jewelry. She took public transport to work 3 days out of 5. She ate lunch alone at her desk. She smiled at security guards and remembered the names of janitors. She was, by every visible measure, an ordinary young woman living an ordinary life in a city full of ordinary people. Except that her father was Gerald Hargrove. The name won't mean much to most people, and that was entirely by design. Gerald Hargrove did not appear on magazine covers. He did not give TED Talks. He did not post on social media or attend galas unless absolutely necessary. What he did was own things. Quietly, methodically, invisibly. Real estate, logistics companies, portions of banks, seats on boards that most people had never heard of. He once told a journalist, the last journalist he ever agreed to speak to, that the loudest people in any room were usually the least powerful ones. Juliet had grown up hearing that. She believed it completely. She had grown up in a world of extraordinary privilege, but her father had made one thing non-negotiable from the time she was a child. She would earn her own way first. She would live without the cushion of the family name before she was ever allowed to lean on it. "I don't want you to be someone who is powerful," Gerald Hargrove had told his daughter when she was 16. "I want you to be someone who understands power. There is a difference. Most people never learn it." So Juliet had studied on her own merits, built her own small career in urban consulting, rented her own apartment in a decent but unremarkable part of the city. She used her mother's maiden name, Aduba, at work. Very few people outside her immediate family knew she was Gerald Hargrove's daughter. That was the way she preferred it. She was not a pushover. Anyone who knew her well would be quick to tell you that. She had a quiet intensity about her, a sharpness behind the calm, a precision in the way she spoke that made smart people choose their words carefully around her. She had no interest in drama or conflict. But she was also not the kind of woman who forgot things. Rex Adeyemi was a different story entirely. He was 32, well-built, naturally charming, the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately began to take inventory of who mattered and who didn't. He had grown up in a middle-class household where money was always slightly tight and respect was something you had to fight for. His father had been overlooked his entire career, passed over for promotions, sidelined by men with connections he didn't have. Rex had watched that happen from childhood, and he had made himself one silent promise. He would never be that man. He worked in financial consulting and he was genuinely good at it. He dressed well, not extravagantly but well. He had a sharp mind for numbers and a sharper instinct for reading people. He had climbed steadily, built a client list he was proud of, and collected a social circle that looked, from the outside, like success. He was the person people called when they needed energy in the room. He was funny. He was confident. He commanded attention naturally. But underneath all of it lived something fragile. A deep, barely concealed terror of being disrespected. A sensitivity to status so acute that small slights. A waiter who served someone else first. A colleague who spoke over him in a meeting. A stranger who didn't acknowledge him the way he felt he deserved. Could ruin his entire day. He disguised this insecurity almost perfectly. Almost. The people who knew Rex best knew not to embarrass him in public. They had learned, over time, that his pride was the most delicate thing about him, and that it could, under the wrong conditions, become something volatile. Juliet and Rex had met 2 weeks before the incident at the restaurant. It was a mutual friend's birthday gathering, a rooftop dinner with about 20 people. They had been seated near each other. They'd spoken briefly. Rex had found her interesting, a little quiet, a little mysterious. Juliet had found him likable enough, though she'd noticed something behind the charm that she couldn't quite name yet. They had exchanged numbers at the insistence of their mutual friend, Saad, who was convinced they would get along. They had met for coffee once. It had gone reasonably well. Rex had done most of the talking, which Juliet didn't mind. She was a listener by nature, but she had noticed, quietly, the way he spoke about other people, the slight edge in his voice when he mentioned anyone more successful than him, the way certain names made his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She hadn't said anything. She'd filed it away. The second time they met was at the restaurant. Saad had organized a group dinner, 8 people, a Thursday evening, a well-regarded Italian place in the center of the city. Juliet arrived alone, 5 minutes early, dressed in a simple cream blouse and dark trousers. She was calm. She was looking forward to a nice evening. What she could not have predicted was what Rex was carrying into that restaurant with him. He had received bad news that afternoon. A deal he had been working on for 4 months, a significant client account that would have been the largest of his career, had collapsed. The client had chosen a competing firm. Rex had found out via a 2-sentence email at 4:30. No explanation, no courtesy call, nothing. He had spent the next 2 hours alone in his office staring at his phone. By the time he arrived at the restaurant, he had already had 2 glasses of whiskey at the bar across the street. He was wound-tight. He was bruised. And he was in exactly the kind of state where a man like Rex Adeyemi became dangerous to be around. For the first 40 minutes, dinner was fine. The conversation flowed. People were laughing. Rex was performing well, keeping it together, though Juliet noticed the slight overbrightness in his eyes, the way he was drinking a little faster than everyone else. Then the moment arrived. It started over something small. Rex was making a point about the property market, something confident and slightly overstated, and Juliet, without aggression or mockery, had gently offered a counter-perspective. She'd cited a recent analysis she had worked on professionally. She wasn't challenging him to humiliate him. She was simply engaging. Rex had stiffened. "No," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "That's not how it works." "Actually," Juliet said quietly, "in the data I've been in finance for 10 years, Rex interrupted. His voice had gone flat, the charm vanishing with uncomfortable speed. "I think I understand property markets." The table had gone slightly quiet. Saad glanced between them. Juliet held Rex's gaze for a moment, then simply nodded and moved on. She did not push. She did not fight. She returned to her food. That composure, that refusal to crumble or defer with embarrassment, did something to Rex that he could not control. He interpreted her calm as dismissal, as if she had looked at him and found him not worth arguing with, as if she had, in the quietest way possible, decided he didn't matter. And that thought, in the state he was in that night, was unbearable. He began to drink faster. The table tried to move the conversation along. But Rex kept pulling it back, kept making small remarks in Juliet's direction. Little digs wrapped in jokes, the kind of thing that was hard to call out directly without seeming oversensitive. Juliet received each one without reaction, which only made things worse. Then, about an hour in, Saad made an offhand comment, something lighthearted about Juliet being too composed for her own good. A joke. Everyone laughed. Rex laughed too. And then he said, too loudly, with too much edge beneath it, maybe she's just used to being wrong and pretending it doesn't bother her. The table went quiet. Juliet looked at him. A long, even look. She said nothing. What? Rex said, holding his glass. Did I say something? You didn't, Juliet said simply. Something about those two words, the total absence of defensiveness or hurt, cracked something open in him. He leaned forward. You always do that, he said. This whole calm, composed thing. Like you're better than everyone at the table. Rex, Saad said quietly. I'm serious, he said. You've been sitting there all night like you're judging everyone. Like we're all below you. I haven't said anything like that, Juliet said. Her voice was even. Her hands were still. You don't have to say it. Rex. Another friend, Marcus, put a hand on his arm. He shook it off. And then, in a moment that no one at that table would ever fully understand, Rex Adeyemi picked up his glass of cold soda, stood up from his chair, and threw its entire contents directly into Juliet Hargrove's face. The sound of ice hitting the floor was the loudest thing in the restaurant. Juliet did not gasp. She did not scream. She sat completely still as the liquid dripped down her face, soaking her collar, pooling in her lap. Her eyes were open. Her breathing was steady. The entire restaurant was frozen. Rex stood there. For just 1 second, something crossed his face. Something that might have been shock at his own action, or might have been satisfaction, and then it hardened into defiance. Maybe now you'll react, he said. Juliet reached up slowly. She took the cloth napkin from her lap. She pressed it once, carefully, to her face. She set it down. She looked at Rex with those calm, terrifying eyes and she said, clearly enough for half the restaurant to hear, "You'll remember this moment." She picked up her bag. She stood. She straightened her blouse. And she walked out. The door had barely closed before someone at a nearby table pulled out their phone. Rex laughed about it that night. That was the thing people found hardest to believe afterward. That when his friends sat with him in a bar later, shaken and uncomfortable, Rex laughed. She needed someone to get a reaction out of her, he said, swirling his drink. She's been playing that Ice Queen act all night. Saad had already left. Marcus was quiet. A few others laughed awkwardly, the way people do when they're not sure what else to do. By midnight, a phone video had been posted online by a fellow diner. It had been filmed from 2 tables away and caught everything. The throw, the silence, the 4 words, the walkout. The caption was simple. What kind of man does this? By morning, it had over 300,000 views. Juliet, meanwhile, had taken a taxi directly to her parents' home. Not because she was broken, not to cry or report what had happened, but because she had a standing Thursday dinner with her family, and she was an hour late, and she did not like to be late. Her father was in the sitting room when she walked in, still slightly damp around the collar. Gerald Hargrove was 61, silver-haired, built like a man who had once worked with his hands. He looked up from the book he was reading. He looked at her face. He looked at her blouse. "Who did this to you?" he said. His voice was absolutely quiet. "Someone who didn't know better," Juliet said, sitting across from him. "Tell me his name." "Dad." "Tell me his name, Juliet." She looked at her father for a long moment. Gerald Hargrove was not a man who raised his voice. He was not a man who made threats. He was a man who, when something needed to be handled, simply handled it, in the same quiet, unhurried way he did everything else. "His name is Rex Adeyemi," she said. "He works in financial consulting. And Dad, I don't want you to do anything. I mean it. Gerald Hargrove looked at his daughter for several seconds. Then he nodded once, picked up his book, and returned to reading. Juliet would later reflect that she should have known, in that moment, that the nod meant something very different from agreement. Rex woke up on Friday morning to 12 missed calls. The first was from his manager. The second and third were from colleagues. The rest were from numbers he didn't recognize. His phone was buzzing continuously. He sat up, confused, and opened the first message, from Marcus. Bro, you need to call me. Now. He opened the internet. He found the video in under 30 seconds. His face went cold. He watched it twice. He could see himself clearly. Standing, glass in hand, the throw, the aftermath. He could see the whole restaurant reacting. He could see Juliet's face, unervingly calm, and he could hear her voice. For words, low and precise. Asterisk, you'll remember this moment. Asterisk. He told himself it would blow over. These things always blew over. He got dressed, went to work, kept his head down. By 10 o'clock that morning, his manager called him into a closed-door meeting. We're receiving calls about you, his manager said, not looking up from her desk. From clients. I can explain. A video is circulating. You're clearly identifiable. 2 clients have already put their accounts on hold, pending a review of our internal conduct standards. She finally looked at him. You need to go home, Rex. Today. He went home. He tried to call Saad. She didn't pick up. He texted Marcus. Marcus replied after 20 minutes. Asterisk, not a good time to talk. Lay low. Asterisk. He told himself it was still manageable. It was social media noise. It would die down. Then Saturday arrived. He received a letter, physical, couriered, formal, from the leasing company that managed his office space. Due to a change in ownership of the building, his lease would not be renewed at the end of the month. He had 30 days to vacate. He stared at the letter for a long time. Then he called the leasing company. I'm sorry, sir. The woman on the phone said pleasantly. These decisions are made at the portfolio management level. There's nothing I can do. Who owns the portfolio? A pause. It's managed under a parent holding company. The name listed is Hargrove Capital. The silence that followed was so complete that the woman asked twice if he was still on the line. If you're still watching up to this point, type, I'm still here in the comment section. Because what happens next is the part that nobody saw coming. Not even the people who thought they understood how this story would end. Rex didn't sleep that weekend. He sat in his apartment and ran calculations in his head that kept leading him to the same impossible answer. He pulled the video up again. He watched it again. He thought about the way Juliet had walked out of that restaurant. Not with the shaken, wounded walk of someone who had been humiliated, but with the measured, unhurried stride of someone who had just decided something. He started making calls. Old contacts. People who knew people. He was trying to find out who Juliet Aduba was. And what he kept finding, the deeper he went, was a strange wall. Records that went so far and then just stopped. A professional history that was real, solid, verifiable, and yet somehow disconnected from anything larger. An apartment that was rented under her own name. A salary that was entirely reasonable. Nothing flashy. Nothing suspicious. And then a former colleague, a man who had worked in high-level corporate law for 15 years, called Rex back with something. You said her name is Juliet Aduba? Yes. That's her work name. Her actual surname is Hargrove. The silence on Rex's end stretched so long the man thought the call had dropped. As in Gerald Hargrove's daughter. Yes. Rex sat down on his couch very slowly, the way a man sits when his legs are no longer trustworthy. How sure are you? He said. Completely. I dealt with the Hargrove legal team 3 years ago. I've seen her at the family offices. It's her. He hung up. He sat there for a very long time. Outside his window, the city moved. People walked past below, going about ordinary lives. unaware that a man 7 floors above them was quietly watching his entire world reconfigure itself into something he no longer recognized. The events of the following week arrived like a slow, coordinated tide. The deal he had been hoping to rescue, a residual client relationship he was counting on, terminated without explanation. A letter arrived confirming the review of his professional certification had been escalated to the regulatory board following a complaint from a member of the public. 3 friends had, without any apparent discussion, simply become unavailable. A dinner invitation for an industry event he had been looking forward to was quietly rescinded. A small investment he had made in a startup, a casual private thing, suddenly required immediate review by the board, and he was asked to step back from any advisory role pending the outcome. None of it was dramatic. None of it was loud. There were no confrontations, no angry phone calls, no public statements. It was simply as if the world had turned slightly, and Rex Adeyemi no longer fit the space he had previously occupied. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating much. The confidence he had carried so naturally for so many years had begun to feel like a costume he had found in someone else's wardrobe, something that had never truly belonged to him. He called Saad on a Tuesday night, desperate. "Saad, I need to ask you something. About Juliet." Saad was quiet on the other end for a moment. Then, "What about her? Her father. Is he Hargrove? Gerald Hargrove?" Another pause. Longer. "Rex," she said carefully, "what have you been doing? Just tell me." "Yes," she said. "Yes, he is. I've known since the beginning. Juliet doesn't advertise it. She never has." "And you introduced us," Rex said. His voice was fraying. "You didn't think to. I didn't think you'd throw a drink in her face." Sada's voice cracked, the composure she'd been holding finally slipping. "Rex, what were you thinking? What was going through your mind?" She was sitting there. She wasn't doing anything. "And you?" She stopped, took a breath. "I can't believe this is my question, but do you even understand what you did? Not who her father is. What you did." He didn't answer. "She's a person," Saad said, quieter now. "She was having dinner. She was my friend. And you humiliated her in front of strangers because she was too calm for you. Because she made you feel what? Insecure? Is that what it was?" "I was angry," he said. "The deal had fallen through and I was. She had nothing to do with your deal. I know, do you?" The silence between them was heavy and unresolvable. "I have to go, Rex," Saad said. "Get some help. Not from me. Just get some help." The call ended. He sat in the dark for a very long time. He reached out to Juliet on a Wednesday. He found her work email through the consulting firm's public directory. He wrote the message 3 times before he sent it. The final version was short. Juliet, I need to speak with you. I understand if you don't want to, but I am asking, please. I would like to meet. She replied 4 hours later. 2 words. Tomorrow. 12. She named a cafe, small and quiet, near her office. He arrived 15 minutes early and ordered water. His hands were not completely steady. He watched the door. When she walked in, she was dressed simply again. Dark coat, no jewelry, hair pulled back. She looked exactly the same as she had in the restaurant. Composed, unhurried, as if this meeting was a minor logistical event in an otherwise unremarkable day. She sat across from him. She ordered tea. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him. "I'm listening," she said. Rex opened his mouth. He had rehearsed this. He had rehearsed it for 2 days. All the words had been there, ordered and prepared, sitting like an argument he'd practiced for a debate. They all left him at once. "I'm sorry," he said, and the moment he said it, he realized how completely insufficient it was, and something in his face gave way. "I'm Juliet, I am so sorry. What I did was inexcusable. I was in a terrible place that night, and I took it out on you, and there is nothing that makes that okay. I know that. Juliet looked at him. She did not look satisfied. She did not look triumphant. She did not look warm. Why are you sorry? She asked. What? I'm asking you a specific question, she said calmly. Why are you sorry? What are you sorry for? He stared at her. For what I did. For humiliating you in public. Are you sorry because you hurt me? Juliet said. Or are you sorry because you now understand who I am? The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Rex went very still. He felt it, the precision of what she'd said, the way it caught him exactly where he was standing, exposed and perfectly described. He wanted to say, because I hurt you. He wanted that to be the true answer. He sat with it for several seconds, searching himself honestly, and what he found there disturbed him deeply. Because for the first 2 days, before Hargrove Capital appeared on the letterhead, before the calls started coming, he had laughed. He had genuinely not felt the weight of what he had done until it had a cost attached to it. And that truth sat inside him now like something rotten. Both, he said finally, because it was honest. I'm ashamed that it took consequences for me to feel the full weight of it. But yes, both. Juliet studied him. Something shifted very slightly in her expression. Not softness exactly. Something more like acknowledgement. I didn't ask my father to do anything, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever has happened in the last week, I didn't orchestrate it. I don't operate that way. Rex looked at her. Then why? Because when you disrespect people, Juliet said, the world has a way of responding. Not always. Not everyone has a father who owns half of what they depend on. But sometimes, patterns catch up to people. You've been conducting yourself a certain way for years, Rex. What happened in that restaurant wasn't the first time. You've left a trail. He had no answer to that. I accept your apology, she said. Not because the situation has resolved itself, and not because I feel generous. I accept it because holding on to it is a weight I have no use for. She picked up her tea. But I want to be honest with you. The way you treated me that night wasn't about me. You were terrified of being seen as small, and I was calm, and my calmness made you feel smaller, and so you tried to break me. That's not a restaurant incident. That's a pattern you've been carrying your whole life. And until you look at it directly, you'll keep paying the price for it in one form or another. She stood. She buttoned her coat. She looked down at him with those same clear, devastating eyes. Take care of yourself, she said, and she walked out again, exactly the same way she had walked out of the restaurant, with perfect posture, without looking back. Rex Adeyemi did not recover quickly. The career rebuilt slowly over the following 18 months, with considerably more humility and considerably less arrogance than he had carried before. He lost the client base he had spent a decade assembling. He rebuilt a smaller, more honest one. He began seeing a therapist, not because anyone told him to, but because sitting alone in his apartment in the weeks after that cafe meeting, he had finally admitted to himself that Saad was right. He needed help, not to get his career back, to become someone who didn't throw drinks into people's faces. He would sometimes think about those 4 words. You'll remember this moment. He did. He always would. Juliet returned to her quiet life. She went back to her unremarkable apartment and her below-the-radar career and her Thursday dinners with her parents. She told her father, the next time she saw him, that she had met with Rex and that it was finished. Gerald Hargrove looked at her over his reading glasses. And nothing, Dad. It's done. He nodded once. This time, the nod meant exactly what it looked like. She sat beside him and picked up her book. You handled that well, he said after a long silence. You taught me, she said. He smiled, small, private, the smile of a man who understood exactly what power was and had managed to pass that understanding on to someone he loved. He turned a page. Power isn't always loud, Juliet said quietly. Not quite to him, not quite to herself, almost to the air. Gerald Hargrove nodded one final time. No, he said. It never is. Because the greatest mistake you can make is underestimating someone who chooses silence over noise. The most dangerous people in any room are rarely the loudest ones. They are the ones who have nothing to prove, the ones who already know who they are, and who understand, deeply and unshakably, that real power never needs to announce itself. Rex learned that lesson the hardest way a person can learn anything, by watching everything he thought he had built dissolve quietly around him, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the slow, inevitable way that gravity works. Without rage, without spectacle, without a single raised voice. That is what makes this story not just a story about humiliation, but about the truth that lives underneath all of us. The truth that the way we treat people when we believe there are no consequences is the truest measure of our character. And that sometimes, not always, but sometimes the world pays attention. Now, if the story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in the middle of it, then do this right now. Hit the like button so this story reaches more people. Drop a comment below and tell me. Was Rex simply a flawed man who made one terrible mistake under pressure? Or was the restaurant just the moment his true character finally showed itself? I genuinely want to know what you think. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Because next week, we are telling the story of a woman who agreed to marry a complete stranger. A man she had known for 6 days, purely out of desperation. Only to discover, on their wedding night, that the stranger had known exactly who she was from the very beginning. That story will leave you speechless. You do not want to miss it. Subscribe now so it comes straight to you.